Okay, so let's start class. I'm going to review very quickly what we did last class. So last class, we learned about monotheism, which is the idea of one true God. And as I said last class, this marked an intellectual revolution in human history. And from monotheism, we developed three new ideas, which are money, individual, and the nation state. It's important to note that these ideas have always existed in human history, but with monotheism, these ideas became the dominant paradigms. And together, they will give us modernity and create the world that we live in today. Okay, so that's what we discussed last class. And remember, last class, we also discussed that this created a lot of problems for us. There are a lot of benefits, but there are also a lot of consequences. Okay, so we're going to continue the story of humanity today. And today, I want to focus on a very specific question. Why do societies rise and why do they fall? Okay, and I know that these first few classes may seem abstract and theoretical, but that's because we're developing the analytical models in order to better understand our world. So as we move on, we will start looking at very concrete examples. But for the first few classes, please be patient. We are going to develop the theory to understand the world. All right? So let's discuss societies, why they rise, and why they decline. Now, unfortunately, we live in a world in decline. So there are lots of signs that the world is in decline. What are these signs? Shout out some signs.
Wars.
Yeah, very good, okay? So you have conflict and wars. You look at the situation in Ukraine, look at the situation in the Middle East. But also, you may have seen the news and you have seen conflicts arising in Southeast Asia, Thailand, Myanmar. Also, Trump is about to send US troops to Mexico and Venezuela. Okay, so we live in a world of conflict. And that tells us that the world is in decline. What are some other signs?
Environmental issues.
Good, yes. So you have climate change. Okay, we are putting too much pressure on the environment, so the air, the water, the land is becoming much more toxic. Okay, good. What else?
Employment rate.
Good, yes. Unemployment is going up. But not only that, but people's attitude towards work is declining. We live in an age when people don't take work that seriously. People are not as enthusiastic. They're not as motivated to work hard as before. And we call this in China the Bailan age, right? The age of Bailan, meaning let it rot. Like, who cares? Don't take things too seriously. In America, the term is called quiet quitting. Okay, you pretend to work, but you're not really working. What are some other signs? So also you have lower birth rate. And this is a very important sign, right? Because if you think about it, if young people refuse to get married and have babies, eventually the world is going to die off, right? So this is actually a very important sign that the world is in decline. And we're seeing this happen throughout the entire world in all societies. The only exception is Israel and Georgia, but these are very small, rare cases. For most societies, there's rapid decline in birth rate. What are some other signs? Okay, you see a lower standard of living. Okay? And all this means is that inflation, right? So people make less money and they can afford less. Prices go up, but people's wages go down. So that's another sign of decline. Okay? What are some other signs?
Health issues like diabetes or high blood pressure.
Okay, you also see higher stress, right? Higher stress, people feel more anxious, people feel more depressed, people feel more stressed. Emotionally, they feel drained. Okay, what else? Okay, people are less optimistic, right? Okay, greater pessimism. Okay. Also, and this is really important, is the idea of debt, right? Both public and private. There are lots of governments around the world that are facing a fiscal crisis. A fiscal crisis just means that they spend more than they take in tax revenue. There are many families in China, in the United States, throughout the world that are heavily in debt. Okay, so debt is a huge issue for the world today. Also, lower cohesion and trust. And what this means is that people no longer trust each other as they did before. Society is less cohesive. If you walk on the street and you see a man on the street bleeding or hurt, you're less likely to help him. Okay, and this is very true not only in China, but also elsewhere as well. So lower trust issues. What are some other signs?
Disease.
Okay, greater disease, yeah. Okay, increase in disease. People are less healthy than before. People are more stressed than before. People are less optimistic. So we can go on and on and on because the signs of rapid social decline are too many. Now, these are signs of decline. Well, if we look at rise, then obviously it's the opposite, right? Yeah. People are much more willing to trust each other. Rather than going into debt, people will save money. People are healthier. People are much more optimistic. People are having lots and lots of babies, right? People are employed. Okay? So these are all signs that society is in decline. The rise, it's the opposite. Also, another sign of decline that's very important that doesn't really happen in China, but happens in the Western world is immigration. Okay? Immigration. Immigration is a huge issue in the Western world, and we will discuss immigration in future classes. But immigration is a sign of decline because it reduces cohesion. Okay? And it also reduces the standard of living. Okay? Another sign of decline is also housing prices go up. So people can no longer afford to buy a house. This is true in China. Young people can no longer afford to buy a house, but it's also true throughout the world. Okay? It's really hard for young people to get by. Okay? All right. Also, fiscal crisis, right? We talked about this, but the idea of fiscal crisis is the government cannot afford a lot of public expenditures. In the future, maybe 5-10 years from now, pension will be a huge problem for governments. Okay? So these are all signs of rapid decline. All right, now having done this, what I'm going to do now is go over some theories as to why this is happening. Why is the world in decline? Okay? And there are lots and lots of theories, but I will present 3 theories to you that I think are interesting. Okay? The first is the idea of financialization. And this theory is proposed by an economist, a French economist named Thomas Piketty. Okay? And he wrote a book called Capital in the 21st century. It is a fantastic book. You don't have to read the book, but if you have a chance, you should definitely pick it up because it is a very easy but very illuminating read. And what he argues is that what happens in society is that capitalism transitions from phase to phase to phase. In the beginning, you have consumer capitalism, meaning that what the society is trying to do is create goods that consumers want to buy. This is an era of rapid wealth generation. Then you move into financial capitalism, which is a period of investment. Rather than build factories, you put the money into the stock market. Okay? So you're trying to generate as much money as possible. But what we discussed last class that's very important is wealth and money are not the same thing. So in the first phase, consumer capitalism, you focus on the generation of wealth. In financial capitalism, you focus on the generation of money. And then you move on to monopoly capitalism, which is where just a few companies control everything. And we live in an era of monopoly capitalism. And this happens because it is much more profitable for companies to be monopolies than to be in competition with each other. Financial capitalism is looking to create as much money as possible, not as much wealth. And so a few companies come to dominate, become monopolies. And that's the age we live in today. Okay? Now, why is this important? It's important because when we make this transition, people are no longer focused on working hard. They're only focused on speculating. All right? So let me give you an example. Let's just say I'm an entrepreneur and I want to make as much money as possible. Well, what I do is I build a factory. When I build a factory, I'm creating real wealth because a factory requires you to hire workers. It requires you to build technology. It requires you to build goods that people want to buy. But after I build a factory and I make a lot of money, I want to take this money and let it grow as fast as possible, so I put it in a stock market. Okay? And that's just how people behave. The problem is that if too many people do that, then no one's really working. No one's creating real wealth in the economy. The other problem is that because of the way capitalism is set up, if everyone's putting the money in the stock market grows too fast. And the real economy does not grow that fast. Okay? And the difference is stark. Thomas Piketty spent a lot of time going over income tax, just looking at how much tax people paid. He did a lot of statistical analysis. And what he discovered is the real economy in late-stage capitalism will grow about 2%. The financial economy will grow at 5%. Okay? And this is really key. What this is telling us is that if you have $1 million, you could choose to go and open a restaurant, or you could choose to invest in the stock market. If you open a restaurant, you will make at most $20,000 a year. But if you were to put in the stock market, you would make $50,000 a year. So everyone's going to put all the money in the stock market, which allows for the stock market to increase. But the real economy is not improving. And therefore, you have all these issues arise. Greater unemployment, greater debt. No one's really working. Okay? So that's the idea of financialization. And what Piketty argues is that this is just a natural cycle. This is just a natural byproduct of capitalism. We live in an age of late stage capitalism. Is this clear to you guys? Any questions before I move on to the second theory?